everyone, and thank you for coming to our session. My name is Dr. Deja Jones. It is noon here, so good afternoon if you are on the East Coast. Good morning if you're on the West, and I guess good early afternoon if you're somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so I'll introduce myself and then I'll let Ashley take the floor. So as I said, my name is Dr. Deja Jones. This workshop session is about rewriting the narrative. And so as a researcher, one of the things that I've come across often is just that there's very little diversity in environmental education right now. And it really presents itself in the curriculum that we use. And so we wanted to do this workshop session on how to take curriculum and make it more diverse, how to embrace equity in nature education. And then I'll let Ashley introduce herself.
Greetings all. If we go to the next slide, we have our little bio, but me in a nutshell. Um, I am a mother of two. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 14-month-old. If you have seen me on any other talks, I'm usually wearing my baby girl, but so graciously, she is with dad at this moment, so I can be fully present. I am the creator of Afrocentric Montessori, and that whole encompassing thing is creating Montessori materials, talking about the love of Montessori and the philosophy while infusing African principles, Black culture, and Black identity. I'm the co-founder of Gather Forest School. So that's where we have all these united points talking about how can we rewrite a lot of this curriculum to have more of the global majority while being outside. Because that also is a key part, that how do we also bring that outdoor element? I
Mhm.
love treats, especially chocolate. And truly, my attention, and I share the same attention with Deja too, that you leave this presentation with actionable steps to become agents of power to co-create. Because you're not just doing it, you're not just creating for yourself, but also for the students. You're co-creating spaces of wonder and learning while keeping the Black child front and center.
Yep. Um, and I'll share just a little bit of basics about myself. I'm from New Jersey, it's where I currently live. I always say I live and work between two cities. So there's Trenton, New Jersey, which is where I'm from, and then there's Newark, New Jersey, which is where I've always worked. Um, I am a former nutrition and education educator with Food Corps. If you are familiar with Food Corps, I love their mission. I love the organization. It is a service industry. They are affiliated with AmeriCorps. And so if you are working in a school district and you are interested in embedding nutrition and environmental education and gardening education in your curriculum, but you don't feel like you have the bandwidth, I always say Food Corps, AmeriCorps is definitely a great way to really get that jump started in your schools and in your districts. I am the founder of Honeypot Montessori. We are a nature-based Montessori school in Newark, New Jersey. We are in a very urban community, and so many of the work that we do with our children is around place-based nature education. And then through partnerships with local parks, we're able to get full outdoor experiences on weekends or after school. I love connecting small children to nature. It was a really big highlight for me as a child, and it's something that's been lost as we become more industrialized in like our cities. And it's just a part of childhood that all kids should get to experience. I love gardening. I love being outside in the garden. It's very therapeutic. And I'm a very big reader. And so I love books. I love getting lost in the pages of fiction. It helps me like center myself, ground myself. And that is a little bit about me.
I will also like to throw a little tidbit. Deja also is an author. She forgot to add that. So she's an avid reader and writer as well. Go ahead, my love.
And so just an overview for today. We're going to explore Dr. Goldie Mohammed's equity framework, and we're going to have an opportunity to apply it to a developed sample nature-based lesson plan to really see like Is this diverse? Can it be more diverse? I think these are questions that we always want to keep in the back of our minds. Um, it's an opportunity for us to engage in discussion and activities that help us rewrite dominant narratives. We're also going to talk about different tools for assessment, one of those being the connectedness to nature scale, and how we can use this in our communities to attract certain populations of children, but then also assess how they view nature, how they're able to access nature in their neighborhoods. And then, we're going to leave with some practical tools and strategies. And so, as my partner Ashley mentioned, we do have resources that we love for you to take away from this session. We're here for a bit of a time, and so we want to make sure you get the most of your time here with us. And so for this part, we're going to be talking about embracing equity in nature-based early childhood education. So the first question that I get is what is equity, right? And how is equity different from equality? And so when we think about equality, we're thinking about this notion that everyone should have the same things. But when we talk about having the same things, we're leaving out quality, we're leaving out relevancy, we're leaving out timeliness, and how are these things responsive to each person's individual needs. And so while we might give someone, just thinking about historically when we're thinking about going back to like Jim Crow, separate but equal. And so we're thinking about equal, right? Like we all have access to bathrooms. However, there's a whites only bathroom, there's a colored bathroom. And we know that the quality of both are not the same. But it's the idea that, well, we gave you both bathrooms, and so that should be enough. And so the idea of equality is just thinking about how we are giving so that we are meeting the needs of people and then understanding that people have different needs. And so when we're talking about centering non-white children in nature-based education, we're talking about inclusivity, right? So how are we including all diverse populations in nature-based education? And why is it important, right? It's important because it helps children who don't have to experience certain things become more aware of how they can get involved. And so you're building those relationships and those stewardship practices. So what is the end goal? Inclusive education prepares students to navigate and contribute to a multicultural world. And so, well, I'm in the United States. I don't know where everyone else is from. And so if you do want to post your locations in the chat, you can do that as well. And so, I'm in the United States. We are a melting pot of cultures. We are a melting pot of languages, race, religion, so many different ways of life. And so it might seem impossible or it might seem like a challenge to be able to create something that would cater to all of that. But the beauty of nature education is that nature is for all. And how we experience it is going to be different. And that diversity and those differences are the things that we want to celebrate in other people. And so why does it matter? It helps us combat biases that we might have. It helps us combat stereotypes. And so for many, there are stereotypes that Black people don't like to be outside. We don't like to engage in nature. And we know that's not true. But because of popular opinion and public rhetoric, those are some of the things that have become tacked on to our culture. It also promotes empathy and understanding. And so if you are working in a space where you are working mainly with white children, it is an opportunity for you to talk to them about some of the issues that are happening in communities of color around topics such as environmental racism, right? And so what is happening with this nature gap and how does it impact people? And so even if you are a person that does not have to experience it, you can still make known to other children what other children are experiencing. And it does promote empathy, right? And it promotes the understanding that although we all have this access, some people have more than others, some people don't have at all, or the quality of what's given or able to be experienced is not the same and is not quality. So why do we embrace equity? I think one thing that knew that I wanted to state when I came onto this call is just how a word like being woke has become so politically weaponized. And if you are a person living in a POC body, we embody wokeness every day because every day that we are alive and every day that we are having experiences in this world, we have to operate with a sense of awareness that, our experiences are going to be super different to others because of our race. And that's not necessarily 100% negative thing, and it's not necessarily 100% positive thing. But being woke is being constantly aware and mindful of yourself and other spaces and how these spaces impact how you show up as an individual, how, how systems are impacting how you're able to show up in different circumstances. And so when we think about woke culture, and what it's become today, it's become such a radicalized word. It's become such a negatively connotated word, and it was never intended to be that. And so when we talk about embracing equity, we're walking in the space of wokeness, right? Because we are understanding that in this space here in nature-based education, that it should not be one size fit all, right? We should be recognizing that all children have different needs, experiences, and desires. And these differences are not a handicap, right? These are things that we can celebrate. These are opportunities for us to celebrate these differences. When we are walking in a spirit of equity, we are understanding that this is an opportunity to collaborate, right? So we have children from diverse backgrounds, they can learn from each other. And then it also builds mutual respect for these differences. It helps us explore and celebrate diversity. And so, as I said, differences are not handicaps, but they're opportunities for us to affirm one another, to teach one another, and to celebrate the things that make us unique. And so, just thinking about working with children who might speak different languages, right? And so, there might be different plants. Plant cultures, leaves, fruits that they might call a different name. And that's an opportunity for children who do speak the more dominant language to be able to learn about another culture's language and how they identify foods. Or you might want to learn about even just the food itself and how it's prepared differently based on cultures. And so these are opportunities to really learn. These are opportunities to grow our perspectives in this world. And so also it builds a stronger learning community, right? And so everyone feels seen, everyone feels valued, everyone feels included. And so, what is the current landscape of diversity in nature education? And so, in 2004, in North America, period, there are thousands of nature-based schools, whether it's forest schools, whether it's a hybrid between nature immersive programs and traditional preschools, farm schools, Waldorf schools, and Montessori schools that deeply embed nature elements into their curriculum. However, what we are seeing is the population that's being more drawn and attracted to these programs are middle class white people who can afford them. Because more than likely, if you are in the United States and you do not live in maybe Washington State or Colorado recently, you are living in a state that does not recognize nature education as a valid form of pedagogy. And so most times these schools remain independent and private. And so, in order for these schools to remain open, now we're talking about tuition and we're talking about the affordability of tuition. And so, myself as a school founder, that's something that I struggle with often. How should I, how should I create tuition tiers that are affordable, but that are enough for me to sustain the business? And so I think that's something that we constantly go back and forth on. And when we're in that space where we have to charge high tuitions, we're leaving out a wide variety of populations. And so this is something that we are currently seeing in the nature-based education landscape, especially in early childhood education. Um, and so, we learn about nature gaps and how there are nature gaps that exist in the neighborhoods already, and how this also impacts the nature-based education climate in early childhood education. And so I want us to do an exercise. So if you have your phone, you can scan the QR code. I'm going to stop my screen share. You can scan the QR code and it will take you to a document, which is the equity analysis and reflection worksheet. And so if you can make a copy of this document and save it to your drive so that you're able to type into it, I want us to take a few minutes, and what I like to do is called the equity analysis and reflection worksheet. And so it helps us really think about who's being represented in the work that we are doing, but then also on the flip side, who's missing out, right? Who's missing out? But then let's think about ways that we can embrace equity a little bit more in our work. What are things that we need to do? If it is beyond us, what are some system things that need to take place for us to get to a place where we're able to fully embrace equity in our work? Okay, so I want us to take some time, and this is an open dialogue for us to talk about what are some things that we notice who's represented in our work. And so if you like to come off mute and you like to answer some of those box questions. So like who's representing your work? Like what races and ethnicities, languages, ages, gender, and so forth is represented in the work that you do. Does anyone want to share out? If you're not comfortable,
Yes, I will, if you have a minute.
yep.
Okay. I work for a migrant seasonal and early Head Start program. And so I'm in Arizona. We serve many children who are Hispanic. That could be from Mexico, Central America, Puerto Rico. We have children who are from Mexico that are Mixteco.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at our early Head Start site, we have families from the Congo. We have families from Ukraine that are refugees here. And so our languages go from Spanish, Mixteco, English, French, Russian, across the spectrum, and all of our families are low income. So that is who we are working with.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Judy.
I can present. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Andrea. I work at Reed Park Zoo in Tucson, Arizona. So very much like Judy, very high Hispanic population. We also have a reservation, the Tohono O'odham Nation. A lot of our speakers are English and Spanish, but we get kind of a variety as well. For our programs here, mostly it's ages 2 to about 12, but we do audiences of all ages, and just kind of a variety of religions, Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, and then non-denominational. We get all kinds of reading levels, and we can range from very low income to very high income. It's kind of a big range here in Tucson. And then some of the common disabilities that we see are ADHD and autism for sure. We kind of get a big spectrum for that.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. I think we have time for at least two more share outs if anyone's comfortable, and then we'll move over into breakout rooms. And we have some reflection questions at the bottom. So we're not going to get to all of these questions because they are a lot. And this is a tool for you to use, on the call and off the call. But we're going to take maybe about a 10-minute, 5 to 10 minute breakout just for you all to discuss some of these questions. But we do want to give the floor to at least two more to share. And I also see some answers in the chat as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Angie Oliver with Queen of Hearts Education, and I'm in the DFW Dallas area. We have a large Asian community here, mixed between Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese, Malaysian. So that's a big focus in this area, all with different religions, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing, Angie.
Can I just say that it is so beautiful to hear how much diversity is in the work and how many people are sharing their population. It's just like I'm sitting here like, wow, I think that is so amazing. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. And then I'll read Ella as well in the chat. Because she has sleeping babies, so I totally understand that. And so, Ella is a family child care provider. Um, she, hopefully I got that pronoun right. She has white, Hispanic, and Native American families represented in their program. Um, and then I'm realizing I have little knowledge of socioeconomic level and religion. That's okay. And that's the point of this exercise is for us to reflect on what we do know about our families and what are we including in our work that represents them. And so that's totally okay if you don't have that information. But it might be something you'd want to like look into and just think about how, you know, those different identities like impact who they are as a family, and what they have access to and things like that. And so we're gonna move into a breakout. I know Bruce is on here setting us up, and we're going to take how much time? Maybe like 7 minutes.
7 minutes because we have a Q&A after this part.
Okay, so maybe about 7 minute breakout rooms. And we're going to have an opportunity to answer some of these questions. And so what patterns did you notice as you were thinking about your families? What groups are represented in your work? Who is missing? And then what features do you believe are contributing to the populations that are missing, right? And so what do you think is impacting their ability to be involved? And then we can go as deep as what conditions, behaviors, knowledge, skills, etc. are entities that are assets to the work that you do. Because having those assets can really make a difference in our programs when we are looking for different populations and resources. And so we're going to take 7 minutes breakout, and we're going to get a chance to discuss those questions, and then we'll bring it back for a Q&A. Okay, I'm going to mute myself. So we just had a little bit of time in some breakout rooms. You got a chance to talk to each other about some things you're doing in your work. Got a chance to reflect more, talk about what you filled in on your chart. And so we're going to open for Q&A before we move on to the next portion of like our presentation. And so if there's anything that anyone wants to share, any questions, some things that might have come up while you were talking to someone in your breakout room, this is a great time to do that.
I can share. Oh, go ahead.
No. I was just mentioning, I don't know if I got cut off, but we had a parent cooperative preschool where we had families and parents volunteer with us that often made up the extra time we would have had to staff. And getting to know the families really helped us because while the parents were busy working, maybe the grandparents were more involved with nature and had those skills they wanted to impart, but not the time or the opportunity. So that was one way we solved some of the staffing issues.
Yes, I was just going to noodle on Angie's thought that she shared. Because I was like, yes, because in my head, I'm like, that's always an option, but I need to make sure I take the time to build those connections. So that it's a two-way street that they feel welcome to come in, that they feel welcome to share ideas. But thank you for sharing that, Angie, because I'm like, I wrote that down, like that is something that I'm going to do for this upcoming year is lay the foundation for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Angie also posted in the chat when we were talking about the different representations in our work, to also include family dynamic, which is also very important. Just thinking about foster, adoptive, same-sex, single, parent households, whether there's parents in the military or whether there's grandparents involved. And so that's something that's also very important. It's something that we also experience at Honeypot. We have a lot of same-sex couples. And so when we are thinking about inclusion, I know for the most part, when we have like those gendered holidays, we want to celebrate, Mother's Day, we want to celebrate Father's Day, we want to celebrate those traditional type of holidays, but also considering that there are children who have a different dynamic, or there might be a child being raised by their grandparents or like an auntie or uncle. And so how are we including them in our work that we do?
I also worked in a parent cooperative preschool, and it really does help with getting to know families. But we make a point of that. But one thing we do at the beginning of the school year is do a home visit, not to do any kind of inspection. And we always tell everybody that it's just to get to know one another. And so I'm going to their turf, so it's more comfortable for them and more comfortable for the kids, and we make friends before we go to school. But that is incredibly helpful in getting to know people, because they're much more willing to be relaxed and have a conversation and express concerns as we get things rolling for the year. And it just sets up it only takes 15 to 30 minutes, but it sets up a beautiful foundation for the start of the school year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, home visits are important. So we don't do home visits with Honeypot, but when I used to work for KIPP schools, and I was a kindergarten teacher, and so one of the things that we would do at the end of the school year is we would do home visits to the children's homes that were going to be coming in for the next school year. And like you said, it was an opportunity to like meet the family, also like give you insight in like the family dynamic in the household, meet the children, and have a familiar face, so when the first day of school does roll around, they'll at least have like a teacher or someone that they remembered seeing over the summer. And so yeah, home visits are definitely important. And if that's something that anyone's interested in incorporating in their programs, that's something that it's definitely lasting. It makes an impression. Does anyone else have I'm like looking at the chat as well?
I would just say, to add to what you're saying, is that doing some type of home visit in terms of nature-based education really gives you a picture of what type of outdoor setting they're working with at home, which gives you an opportunity to make that relationship stronger later by saying, remember that little tree in front of your house? You could plant tomatoes there. Something that makes the connection more personal.
Yep. That's a great idea. And maybe maybe even take a packet of seeds or something and plant together.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
Yes, I love that.
Well, that way you're already introducing the family to the education you're going to provide, and they don't feel separated from it. They feel like there's an ease to incorporating the lessons at home, and family engagement is the buzz, right? That's what we're supposed to do.
Yep. That's what I didn't even think of that. Thank you for that idea. Does anyone else have questions or a comment? Doesn't have to be a question. It can be something interesting that you thought of that came up while you were speaking to each other.
I have one more, y'all, because I have a friend in Germany who teaches forest kindergarten, but they don't have any predators or poisonous snakes or spiders. So knowing kids' allergies and stuff, if you're going to be outdoors, is also kind of a big one.
Mm-hmm.
What you're actually maybe going to encounter.
Yep, I agree. Totally agree. Being in a city like Newark, you see lots of different little wildlife critters. then you also see a lot of things that probably shouldn't be there. So like litter. And so everything is like an opportunity for like an education, teachable moment. Um, where we're at, we were walking to the local city park, and along the way, the children would just be pointing out different things like, oh, it's a chip bag on the ground. That shouldn't be there. And so, yeah, and then also being mindful of, like you said, when there are like critters, just thinking about bee stings or thinking about like touching different plants. And so I think, at least working with Black families, that's one of the things that keeps families indoors, is that because they don't want their child to get hurt. They don't want their child to experience like, a scrape or cuts. And so, there's like that education piece around risk play where we talk about like, well, what's an okay hurt versus what's a not okay hurt. And so if it's a scrape or a cut, we can manage that, right? Sometimes children fall, they get hurt. It's an opportunity for them to problem solve. Maybe I shouldn't do what I did again because, this is what's going to happen. But if it's like the dangerous types of hurts, like I'm going to break a bone or something, we understand. And so we just try to help parents find that balance of, they could still have an outdoor experience that's safe, that's also a little risky, but it's a teachable moment for them. Um, and so yeah, just talking about the critters, children are always fascinated by the things that they have not seen before. And when you're working in a garden and you're digging in soil, you might see centipedes that come up, or you might see spiders, or you might see, even like in some cases I've seen scorpion. And so we want children to be educated on like, make sure we don't touch that because it might bite. So like spider bites, scorpion stings, and so yeah, that resonates with me, Angie. And so we want to move on to part two. And so part two is going to be led by Ashley, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll do a quick pause. If you need to get water, use the bathroom, please do that because we've been sitting for almost an hour. I think it's been going super fast. I wasn't even aware of how long I've been sitting. So if you just need to stretch or move your body, this is the perfect time to do so. Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcoming us all back into the space to get to the nitty-gritty of the how. That is usually the biggest thing that's on most people's mind. Like, this is great information, but how do I actually do it? And this can be used for, it doesn't matter who you have in front of you. What is your demographic? All children benefit from an approach where the global majority is at the center. So let's jump into it. So we are going to be exploring Dr. Goldie Mohammed's equity framework. I use this framework when I am designing anything for children. So my background is in primary, ages 3 through 6, but at our forest school at Gather, we have children all the way to the age of 12. So I sometimes have to expand up. I have to sometimes simplify a little bit, but I will say Dr. Goldie Mohammed's framework allows for expansion or simplifying in a beautiful way. So I'm going to start with a quote from a podcast she did in 2021. I studied, I researched, I talked to the children. I did not sit in that comfortable pool of struggle because some teachers and leaders can be like armchair revolutionaries. Yeah, we need to change. We need change. But then they don't do anything. It's uncomfortable to study, to read an extra book, perhaps for some people, but that's where the growth happens. I love that quote because sometimes it actually is hard to read that extra book, to study, especially we all live very full lives. And sometimes to stretch a little bit more can be really difficult. But that is where the growth happens. And that's also where the comfortability to be able to see something and say, how can I expand this to bring more perspective and more voices in, regardless of the children in front of me? And so that's what we want to get to as educators. And just borrowing Deja's words about living in this state of wokeness where I'm seeing the equity, the need for equity wherever I go. I don't need to be pushed by a parent. I don't need to be challenged by my students to start looking for it, but it's the framework I'm already operating in. We could go to the next slide. So we'll start with the identity development. So that's the first stage. And I will say for early childhood, I think we're getting to a point where we see libraries that usually have books where the child can understand oneself and others. And when we think about equity work, when we think about expanding the lens, we usually go to books. That's usually literature is like our first stop. And that's kind of where we like to rest that. We're like, all right, we got the library together. Children can see themselves in the literature. And then it's like, that's all we're gonna stay there. What ends up happening is that when we start talking about the math and the sciences, and within the sciences, we have like zoology, biology, geography, those things where people attach rigor to, we end up swinging back the pendulum and staying in a very white-centric frame. And all that diversity, all that equity we were talking about doesn't get brought into the conversation. And so what's so great about this framework is it's pushing us to think beyond just identity development. Because now we're going to think about also skill, developing proficiencies across academic disciplines. So we're thinking just beyond language, just beyond read alouds for literature, but we're seeing all the skills that children need. How can we make sure that we're thinking about the global majority when we are teaching these subjects? The next step is intellectual development, gaining knowledge and becoming smarter. And with the intellectual development, I tell folks, even early childhood can start working with these skills because children are making connections all the time. And our last stop is criticality. So for those who are in the early childhood boat, we're laying the foundation for criticality. So at that age, when I'm talking about 3 to 6 or even before 3, we're really staying with that identity development. Like we're not really teaching children about the power dynamics, anti-oppression, because, and I'm using a Montessori philosophy when I'm speaking here. So there might be people who push back and say, well, if I believe this, I'm speaking from a Montessori way of thinking. The child brain is not yet ready to make those connections about oppression at the age of 6. Those are conversations we do say for later ages of development. We have our 9 and 12-year-old where we are able to have that kind of back and forth dialogue. They're able to reflect where they are currently and make connections that even 6 to 9, I'm a little cautious on. So when we're talking about the learning and developing the ability to read text, including print and social context to understand power, equity, and anti-oppression, we save those for children older than 6. But that 3 through 6 is very critical when we're laying that foundation of how are we bringing materials into our classroom. So after this slide, I have resources where you can choose books to help build that foundation. So when the child is going on 9 and upward, you can have these conversations about the broader world. So next slide. And the most important element of all is joy. That is what keeps us here and grounded in the work. And that is teaching students about the beauty and truth in humanity. And so I always like to add this point here because joy has become a big push within doing equity work, within doing lessons, for students of the global majority, joy is usually where we want to start the conversation. But I always encourage practitioners that it's joy and, because we also got to make sure, like Golden Muhammad pushes us to think about how is the intellectual being brought in? How's the skill development being brought in? Because all of these pieces are important. It's not one or the other. It's definitely an and. And so collectively, these 5 pursuits for the whole child to be seen, and it provides children with academic and personal success, because academics is a part of the conversation. And so we can go to the next slide. So this is how we're going to get into the how. It's these inner dialogue questions. I don't know if you're anything like me. Sometimes it's easier just to give folks the answer, but then when you leave a workshop, you leave a training, you're like, okay, I have this great lesson plan, but I don't know how the person got there. So with these inner dialogue questions, we're actually going to do the work of how did we get there? So then you can apply this way of thinking to anything you're going to create, or any lesson plan that you find on Tinkergarten or Teachers Pay Teachers, or the number of resources where you can find lesson plans. You're able to critically think through and say, like, how can I amplify this? How can I add to this to make sure it's a lesson that is overflowing with equity? Okay, we could jump into the first question. Why are you teaching this? Like, purposeful teaching. So it got to go beyond, because it's mandated, a part of my school curriculum. Like, we all been there where it's like, I need to teach this because I have to. It's what it tells me to do. You want to get, like, let's scrape that part off, because that's a part of many of our realities. And it's like, what is your personal connection to the material? How do you want to make this material, or these materials you want to add some attachments to it, your own? What story can you tell with this lesson? Because we start with the why of why are you teaching this? Because remember, we got to get to those skills. So if we're thinking about, I need to teach this skill, it will change your purpose of how you're teaching that lesson. Because, like, you'll start thinking, does the child need to go through all these steps? Do I have to teach it this way? If the skill is just one-to-one correspondence, can I be creative in the way I get to the end goal? So starting everything is like, okay, why am I teaching this? What is the purpose of this lesson? Can help you start pulling out the fluff and get to the heart of it. Because sometimes the fluff tires us out. Because everybody on this call wants to make sure all children are being seen in the curriculum, want to make sure that they are creating diverse experience for their students. I strongly believe that. But sometimes the to-do list for educators is so long, but you're like, I am human. And so when we get down to the, like, what is the purpose? Why am I teaching this? It can help save your creative energy, because we all are creative beings. I'm also going to state that too. Everybody here is creative in their own way. So we could go to our second question. How will my teaching, so let me just set aside, how will my teaching help students to learn something about themselves, including their racial and cultural identities or others? And this ties to the exercise you did with Deja about, you have to, like, know your students. To even answer that question, you have to know them. And that's also a journey in itself on how do you get to know your students. There are different ways to do that, especially if you have younger students. So evening roundup, monthly or bi-monthly family nights, we shared earlier about doing home visits. Or even if you have a centralized, because transportation is also something we always should think about, a centralized location where it is a place where we meet up and talk. Having questionnaires can also be another way for you to get to know your students. because all of this information you're gathering is actually going to feed into how you create your lessons. Or even if, again, you find your lessons somewhere else, because you're doing that slow work, and it really is slow work. I'm not saying that by September, you should know everything about your students and their families. If you have a goal where you're like, you know what, I'm going to know two or three things about this family, two or three things about this family the next month, it's not about how fast you can go. It's about the consistency of doing the work. Because oftentimes it's like a mad dash. August, September hit, you're like, I'm going to get all this done. I'm going to be about this equity work. And you're so excited and you're like hitting the ground running, to the fact that people are noticing, like, this is great. And then that, December, then January, then February, it kind of like start going down because you're tired, because you're human. Like, this is slow work. If you find out questionnaires don't really work, like it becomes extra paper, especially for nature-based schools, we're always thinking about paper consumption. Like, what is the purpose of this paper? It could be just having scheduling on your time when you're doing pickup or early drop off, or finding time in your day to just chat with parents and just make a note. I'm talking to these three parents today, asking how their evening went, what do they enjoy on the weekends, like finding creative ways to get information that you can use to know more about your class. We could go to the next slide. Because identity is multi-layered and it is complex. Like, it is extremely complex. And that's why it was important that we added that line about the racial and cultural identity. Because when we talk about diversity is actually it's a quite broad statement. And you can find diversity actually in many different things. But sometimes, even as we pull out diversity, you can still have an all-white program, an all-white school, and say you're diverse on a number of different areas. So it's always important to make sure we're being clear with our language about when we're talking about diversity, yes, to all the many ways that we're multi-layered, but we also going to be very clear about bringing in that race and cultural diversity too. So with every lesson or unit we teach, we should help students make connections between themselves and others. And so we can do that with subjects areas outside of language. Language is usually our first go-to, but we can expand identity work with your math and sciences to include different topics within your centers. If you are doing worksheets in your programs, you can also go beyond apples, ladybugs, pumpkins, and farms. Like, those are typically, when you look at early childhood, especially nature-based, we love them apples, them ladybugs, pumpkins, and farms. And so, like, we could also extend beyond the traditional red barn and white farmer. Like, think about all the different cultures that farm. Like, why can't some of those images and discussions be had? Why can't we also compare how the farming happens in the United States? Like, so really broaden what is possible, because the child's mind can go there. I'm just going to put that out there. The child's mind can go there to see another world and also recognize the world that they're currently in. And again, when I'm talking about another world, I am rooting it in reality, not so much the imaginative world. Within the sciences, we can amplify like global locations and non-white scientists who made discoveries. So even if you are showing pictures of discoveries made before you talk about a certain topic, those are planting seeds, because children are wondering, looking, asking questions. Like this, as an educator, that is what you want to give to your students. You want to give them the ability to see something, wonder about it, and say like, this person, the children, again, before 3 are recognizing differences, and they're saying like, this is pretty cool. This person is different. This culture is different. And then you're having this open dialogue. So for early math skills, as well as for your science work, if you're able to learn about some of the identities of your students, you can incorporate that into the materials that you use within the classroom. I'm sorry, they're doing work in a room right next door. Are y'all able to hear me? I'm assuming so. Let's check the chat. Okay, I'm assuming that you can still hear me. Okay, awesome. That's beautiful. So you can incorporate that materials within the classroom based on favorite foods of your students, based on different religions. And I know religion and spirituality can be tricky depending on where you teach at. But from my standpoint, we always use the language like, this is what others believe. This is a belief that so-and-so share, like if the student feel comfortable sharing out, because I always will tell a student like, hey, I've been exploring, I learned more about your religion, I've been exploring it, I want to share some of it. Are you okay with that? And so I will identify the student. The student's like, no, I don't want to. As a teacher, I always have a backup plan and just keep moving on with the lesson. But it helps to co-create a reality with your student. When a child comes into your learning space, whether you have a classroom or whether you are 100% outdoors, and see what they do at home, what they eat, how they practice their faith, clothing that they wear, it's like the possibilities are limitless. It's infused in the lesson. You have a buy-in. They feel seen. They feel like they're co-creating. Like my presence here is added to a lesson. Like how cool is that? Compared to having a child always come into space and the child's identity is separate from what is being taught. Like when we really think about that, imagine always coming into a space and you do not see yourself at all in the space. Like what you wear, what you look like, how you practice things is never included. You subconsciously, especially for our younger students, just learn how to morph into the dominant culture. Like you just naturally will fit into the dominant culture, and your culture takes a step back because you're like, I don't see it, I don't hear it, therefore it must not be important. Because the mind is smart how it makes these jumps, logical jumps to survive. So it's really important to do this slow work. So if you teach at or lead a program that does not have much cultural diversity, you have to be the one to make sure that you are creating these windows. Like that is part of your work. So, and sometimes we like to hide in the fact that we don't have much cultural diversity, but no, that is part of your work. And to use the term by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop is as a guide or teacher, you offer views of the world beyond their own. And that is the exciting part because you are also on that journey too. And this is coming from a Montessori perspective, but as a guide, it's actually expected that we don't know all the answers. Like that's actually a fundamental belief that I am learning with you. Like these are some of the things that I discovered that I found that was cool, and I'm sharing this with you. But if you find something during my lesson that you think is pretty awesome, we can find it together. Or I could do a little homework when I get home and bring it to the space and we can talk about it tomorrow. Like you are bringing the child with you. You do not know everything. And that is something that as adults, we need to co-create with our students. Okay. Yeah, we could go to the next slide. All right, I know this is a Q&A, but I'm gonna do a quick little pause just to see if anyone has questions, because I'm noticing I am talking a lot and I just don't want to bulldozer. If anybody have any immediate questions, like this is a question that popped in my head, I can answer it now. I'll look at the chat. If people say all good, keep it rolling, sister, I'll keep it rolling. Yes, Melissa, ask a
Yeah,
question.
so a lot of the things that you've been talking about are like long-term classrooms. However, I work at a nature center, so the students that I'm working with, or the children that I'm working with, oftentimes I've never met once in my life. I will never see them again. I might not live anywhere even near them. So, what recommendations would you have for very short-term programming that that people like me would be offering in a nature center type of location?
Yes. So top of mind, what I would do you prep materials before I'm assuming before any workshops or class you're doing with children?
Yeah, so we have a standardized like program plan,
Mhm.
and then each person that is leading a group, they'll reach out to, like, say a teacher for a school group is one that's primarily coming to mind. And we reach out and we ask, like, what are some things that you're learning in your classroom right
Yes.
now? Are there any specific needs that your children have? Is there anything that is important to them that you think that we should touch on? And then we'll adjust that standard programming from there.
Okay, perfect. So because you're checking in the school what they need, I will off the bat, I will make sure any images or any books that I have, if it's a built-in read aloud, have diversity in it in terms of the race, cultural background of the children, perspectives, because you're a program that transitions, like you might not see the same child. You want to make sure that what the children are coming in contact isn't just centering the white experience in white children. Like you want to make sure you are kind of breaking that mold. In the later slides, I have resources that literally tells you where to find diverse books, gives you a breakdown of what exactly you need to build actually a collection for nature-based programming. So that will be my first thing. My second, I always have a globe with me. So even if I have a physical globe, but I also have like a printable where I show children around the world. So if we're talking about a plant, if we're talking about an animal, I go straight to the maps and I show children like where we located at now, and then go through the discovery of this plant was located here, and let children see like, wow, look how far we are from where this was discovered at, or the scientists who found this. Um, and I don't know if you do have children who are from a diverse background that's at a school that's coming to see you. Sometimes sometimes you can ask where students are from, depending on the age group. And map work, globe work is always a great way to like orientate, but also to show children that the world is much broader and bigger than where we are, what we currently experience and see. Because believe it or not, I have had some 6 and 7 year olds that never did globe work. The only map that they experienced was the United States. So it's really important that we add these skills and expose these things to children.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much. That's actually really, really helpful. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So we will move on. And again, we'll have so much time for more questions as well. So how will your lessons help students to learn new skills? So for children, we do need to slow down and think about the skills. Like it goes back to like, why am I teaching this? Skills need to be contextualized, and children need to have authentic connections to the skill, especially for our older learners, right? Like once the child hits that 6 to 9, that lower elementary going to upper elementary, it doesn't have to be such a strong connection because they're able to think a little bit more abstractly. But if you have younger learners, that authentic connection is key. Thinking about, is this are these skills that they that they do at home, or could, like thinking about how families can be a part of the learning. Could it be something that if they're not doing at home, could parents, grandparents, extended family do that with the child? Is it something that extended family does, like helping children to say like, making these connections about the skill so it's not such an abstract thing, especially if you don't have a lot of tools for children to manipulate. Because working with the hands is very important for children to help make those connections with skills. So if you are at a program who like don't have a lot of materials, like really think about how can we use these skills where children are using their hands to understand the skills. So as teachers, we can allow our lessons to lead the child and make those connections to their lives and the world around them. So when we say skills, think about action. What is the child doing to learn these skills? And I'm just going to do a little asterisk. I have nothing against worksheets. I'll just say that right now. I don't have anything against worksheets, but worksheets should not be the only action that children are doing. It can be a support, it can be a practice, but it should not be the only thing the child is manipulating because you're really just moving a pencil. It should be something else in addition if worksheets are part of your flow. But we're going to be talking about documenting later. And with documentation, hopefully you don't need worksheets to document or assess. So hopefully we'll get there. We could go to the next slide. So how will your instruction help students to learn something new? So now it's time for that action I was talking about. How are my students learning about new people, places, things, concepts, histories, or ideals? This right here, I actually have that question written out when I am creating lessons. Because sometimes you do get stuck, and I've been doing this for a little bit, so let's just run down the gambit. I know it works. Children learn, they have a good time. Move on to the next thing. I always ask myself, okay, are my students learning about new people, places, things, concepts, histories, or ideals? Like, are they learning these things? It's important that we don't only teach skills, but connect the skills to the problems and issues in the world. So I'll do a little asterisk here. Again, this is more so for a little bit older. So for children who are out of that primary age. For a 3-year-old, I'm not talking to them about problems and issues in the world. It's hard for them to process that without taking it onto themselves that all of these problems and issues can happen to me or today, because children are still getting a sense of how time works. So you don't want to pile that on. But as the child gets older, you can start having those conversations because the child's able to make those connections. What happened in the world 10 years ago, 20 years ago is different than what's happening in the world today. A 3 and 4-year-old do not have that level of cognition or understanding of that. So we just want to make sure we're saving those conversations for older children. Intellectualism is the goal that gives the fulfillment to education and sparks purpose. When we think about sparking that light, because yes, even a 3-year-old can have like a awakened moment of like, wow, that's so cool, or that's neat, I didn't think about that. That is that intellectualism lighting up. And again, our early learners can, and they really do engage in it, especially if you're grounding your work in children learning about new people, places, things, concepts, history, or ideals. Like, especially if you're grounding it in that, children will be engaged. We could go to the next. Okay, and so for this one, this goes to that last piece before joy about that criticality, about the instruction helping students to learn anti-oppression, anti-racism. So it builds on the pedagogy to cultivate the more humane human, where students develop into empathetic, socio-political, and conscious being. This work is vital. Again, not work for our 3, 4, 5, or 6 years old, but the foundation is important, right? Because we have all been aware of what's happening in the news. We all have been aware of what happens to Black bodies. We live in an anti-Black world, regardless of who you're teaching in front of you. We live in an anti-Black society. So this work right here is actually essential if you are working with children and adults to create a more humane human who is empathetic, sociopolitical, and conscious. Like, that is the fundamental work of, if you have children in front of you, if you work with adults, that is the fundamental work. So since our focus is early childhood, again, we're not teaching directly about these things, about power, oppression, racism. Those are for the older child, the 9 to 12. But the books you choose, the conversations that you're having is paramount. So, and I'm gonna finish this to talk about the books, and then I'm gonna like swoop back to talk about those conversations. So Louise Derman Sparks have an article called The Guide for Selecting Anti-Biased Children's Books. It's a very detailed framework about children's literature to help you build that framework. I have that link listed to the resources, and we're going to take time to actually, where you could go through the resources during this workshop. So that really helps you see the books on your shelf. What am I presenting to the child? But the conversation piece is key, because sometimes as teachers, we've always have our ears listening. We have things that we hear in passing that sometimes causes us to like, that pause. It's that little bit of tension we have where we're like, should I step in? Like, it goes in your mind. It's the should I say something? Should I not? As guides, it is part of our work to slow a moment down and say like, hey, I heard something and I wasn't clear about what was being said, or like, I wasn't aware of the whole conversation. So I'm just curious and I just want to ask some questions and really make sure that we are being aware of what's being said and how our children, how our students are thinking, because this is the perfect time to learn. I tell people this as guides, teachers, even as children, to say things that might be incorrect. We have all picked up things that was not incorrect, that was incorrect. We have all picked up things. And that same way we picked it up there, sometimes, like Britt Hawthorne would say, that we need to set it back down. We don't need to carry it because it's not correct. And so the classroom, the learning environment is the perfect space for that. It's the perfect space to say like, I heard this. What were you thinking about? And get clarity, because sometimes we could be so strong on the materials, on the books, giving the right lesson, but a little bit growth area for the conversations, because sometimes there isn't a guidebook, there isn't like a planned lesson for a conversation. And sometimes it can go left fast, and that's scary. Like, even as an educator, I've been teaching for 13 years. When I have those serious conversations, I go in there fresh, because I know the child might say something I have never heard a child say before. The child might say something that causes me to do this, and I have to be very neutral and have that serious conversation. And so it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. It's still like my insides still get like a little nervous, because I'm like, we're going to have this conversation today, but that's part of the work. I see from Diane. Yes. Yes, thank you, Diane. I'll just read her message. At 3 to 6-year-old, there's a very strong sense of justice. It may not be helpful to talk about world issues, but talking about what's fair and why in their own world builds foundation for later discussion that are more broad. Yes. Because it's like, yes, it's a yes and. So with our students, I always have to be a little bit more, I'm not going to use the word critical. Like I'm trying to find a better word than critical, or even a little bit more direct about fairness. And I'm actually working with this with my son now because he loves to use the word fair. Like he'll see that I give something to my daughter Grace, but he can't have it. And then he said, that's not fair. Mommy's being mean because you gave something to Grace and not me. You're mean. You're not being fair. And so then that's when I'm like, all right, let's sit down and talk about that. And so then I start talking about equity, and what Grace needs is totally different, Anthony, than what you need. When you were Grace's age, you needed those things. You're not Grace's age anymore. You don't need those things anymore. So that's why Grace is getting something that you're not. And so making sure you're slowing down and having those conversations and being open to have those conversations. And that's the tough work. That's the work that's a little bit harder because you're going to hear these things in passing. And sometimes you go look at the time and you're like, I need to get this lesson, but I hear children in the backgrounds calling someone a meanie, calling someone rude. And I'm just going to have to put this other work to the side and let's have this conversation because this is laying the foundation to start talking about this bigger work. Because the child, I'm promising you, if you don't get this foundation down, you will have older children who are unable to make that leap because that foundational work wasn't done. So that is like the slow work, the work that doesn't get tested on, the work that maybe families might push back on. I'm just going to give that truth too. You might have some families who might push back on that. And so it really comes down to finding where do you want to stand on the line? And and every teacher is different. Every teacher is different about what line they're going to stand to and what line they're going to say, not right now, but decide what your line's going to be and stay to it and hold yourself accountable, hold the children accountable. It's slow work, but I promise you, you will create an environment where all children will feel safe. All children will feel safe in that space because they know if somebody says something to me that might hurt me, I have a teacher who's going to make sure that I feel heard and I feel safe. And as guides, that is super important work. Hard work, but important work. Okay, go to the next slide. What text will you layer to support the learning? So text selection matters. I know many of you already know that. So the question really becomes how to find the right books to engage your students. And that's great for follow-up work. That's great for if you read during a child's lunch, if you read before a nap, if you're waiting for pickup and you grab a book. Like your library should be such a beautiful way to tie all the things in that you didn't maybe have time to give a lesson for, or if you do have transient like programming where you don't see the same child every week, your books can help plant beautiful seeds for the child to come back to again and again and again. And to be honest, I tell people, have a little basket and set basket of books in different places in your learning space. Because children can go back to that and look at those books and talk to one another and ask you questions. And so on the next slide, I will share the go-to to find books to decenter the white narrative. Oh my goodness, I'm like scanning the chats and these are some good things. So if you haven't looked at the chat, please make sure you take time to look at the chat because these are some great resources. So these resources here, and now again on the document that we will take time to look through on how I build my criticality within my classroom. So social justice books, I tell people that is a phenomenal website because it offers carefully selected list of books. It gives you book reviews. It actually tells you why a certain book has the rating it has. It has great free professional development too. But they also group their books in collections. So let's say if you wanted to study climate, there's literally a whole book list for climate that you can click and look through. And it goes from children all the way to adults. So even if you are an administrator or a teacher who want to create a book club, this is a great place to start from. Stories of Color is new. It was new to me. I think it's from the Charlotte Mason. Those who follow the Charlotte Mason philosophy, that's where Stories of Color from, because Charlotte Mason is a philosophy that really talks about living books. Books is actually the grounding or the root to that educational ideology. So this website shares so many diverse multicultural stories that brings new ideas, experiences, and perspectives. And so this platform works best on a computer because when you go on it, you can actually pull up the database and let's say you can break it down to, I'm looking for a Black author during the mid-19th century, and they will pull a book. Like that's how exact this platform is. And what makes it even more wonderful, it's free. If you need support on if you're like, I'm super busy, but I care about the work, this site also helps you do lessons and they pull the books for you and you can buy the lesson guides. I want to say they're between $13 and $30 depending on the topic, but you can get it for the whole year. So great site to just actually get lost in. And lastly, Diverse Book Finder is great for librarians, educators, parents, book creators, anyone who's seeking to create a collection. This is a great website to look at too. And they have a page just for Black books in nature. You go to the next slide. Okay, so we're hitting that last part. Like, how will your instructions spread and amplify joy? Do you include joy about people of color? So this idea of spreading, amplifying, elevating the beauty within humanity, joy is key because it's often neglected as we plan and do the work. Like planning takes time, finding materials, because sometimes it takes hours to find material. And then when you find it, you realize, oh, this is not what I actually need. I need to go back and create. And sometimes we get lost in the mechanics of what quote unquote good teaching is, that the joy becomes secondary. Because sometimes you discover while doing it that all this planning you did, like let's imagine this is all the planning you did for this amazing lessons. You find that if you cut that in half, the children are just as joyful. And so sometimes we have to, as we're doing the work, keep like pulling ourselves back, saying like, is this still engaging? Will children be happy doing the work? Not saying that everything for the child has to be exciting and engaging, and the child has to love it. There are some parts of teaching where it's like, this is a foundational thing that needs to be taught. So I'm not saying everything has to be a good time, but you want to make sure that even through the more structured parts of learning, that there is an element of joy when you are giving the lesson. There is an element of excitement of like, this might be a little hard to learn, or we might have to memorize some of these parts, but this is where it's going to take us. We're going to go here by learning these facts. So it is important to include joy when teaching about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as the world has not centered and started with narratives of genius and joy. Typically, what ends up happening when we bring in stories of the global majority is usually housed in struggle, oppression, and resiliency. That's usually how it's housed. So we want to make sure that when we are bringing in these voices, it's out of genius and joy. And one person that comes top of mind is Dr. George Washington Carver. There are several books out there about him, and there's some books that start off about slavery with him, and there's books that start with the joy in his genius of taking care of plants. He will literally spend hours studying the animals, studying the plants, singing and talking to the plants. So that's what we're talking about when we're bringing in diverse voices, like starting with that genius and joy. How did the people that we see today, or who are ancestors that we are studying, how did they get there? Like, no, please don't start with because of all of this oppression, all of this hardship, they had to create something out of nothing. No, like talk about what got their mind tinkering to figuring this out or being this kind of person. And so that's where we want to start with when we bring in these diverse stories. Because what ends up happening when we stay with the struggle, oppression, and resiliency, it becomes a single story. It just becomes like, okay, it becomes traits that we don't want to attach to our children of color. So we want to make sure that children of the global majority know their genius and joy, and they revel in it, and they get excited to hear the stories of their ancestors. You go to the next slide. And our last piece, because parents, families, and caregivers are huge to the work. They actually help. When parents, families, and caregivers are on board, it makes our work as guides and teachers so much easier because you have a buy-in support. You're not remaking the wheel every single time. So the real question become, how can they be partners in the education? Because sometimes, again, going back to that, we could get lost in the mechanics of teaching, because also teaching itself has become so much. We do more than just teach. There's a lot of paperwork and mandates that are part of our teaching that we kind of can't close the door on parents without even knowing we are doing that. We just have so much on our plates. And so I want to go back to what we talked about getting to know our students, making sure you are carving out time to have conversations with family, whether it's like a monthly thing where you're like, everyone comes to the classroom, whether you're doing home visits, whether you are marking on your calendar saying like, I'm going to have these kind of conversations at pickup or drop off, like however you need to make track of, but making sure we are constantly having these conversations with parents, families, and caregivers can help them understand what is happening in the classroom. Because I know newsletters is we do newsletters at Gather, but for some families, it's extra paper or it's another thing to read, especially if they don't have that buy-in yet. So making sure we're using different strategies, because you'll have some families who will read everything you like, anything you put on a paper, anything you post to a chat, they're going to read it. They're going to eat it up. They're going to respond because they just get it. And you have some families who don't get it yet. And so finding the different ways you can plug in without burning yourself out. I just want to say that because this is a lot. I talked a lot, and I also provided a lot of ideas. And so you also have to have that line of like, without burning yourself out. This is slow work. You should not have it all figured out by September. You shouldn't. That means you did a lot. You did a lot. And is that level of energy and output going to be consistent for the 10 months or 12 months if you're running a year-round program? With what you are teaching, there just needs to be those touch points within the home. Again, bringing that question back, how can the parent, family member, or caregiver feel connected to work like the child? Because you know when children come into your space that they love being there, that they love the work. So now the question becomes like, how can the parent, family member, caregiver feel that same kind of excitement about learning something new that their child is learning? All right, and we could go to the next slide. Okay, so I'll pause right here. Before we get into the lesson plan review, because that needs to be put into the chat so you can look at oh, I can actually click it. Oh no, I'm sorry, my friend Deja has it shared that we can actually look at a whole screen, so you don't have to open it up separately. But I will pause real quick to see if anybody have any questions. It's just like a super long monologue, and I'm like, okay, I talked a lot, so let me open up the floor if anybody has something before we jump into a lesson plan. Let's go look at the chat. I think so. Okay. I think that's a no. All right. So we can look at the lesson plans. Let me share. Perfect. Can everybody see the lesson plan? Perfect. Awesome. So summer solstice came, and again, this is for those living in the Western Hemisphere, our summer solstice. And one of the questions I spent hours looking for because I was like, maybe there's a lesson plan, maybe there's something that brings out how different Black cultures celebrate the summer solstice. It's not just one voice. Because typically when you look at books for summer solstice, it's definitely it's either white children being seen, white families, or a perspective that is void of any person from the global majority. So I spent hours looking for that. And then I was like, you know what? Let me go back to a framework and see, can I find out how different Black cultures celebrate the summer solstice? Because for our community, we do have predominantly Black families and students who go to our forest school. And so because of my background in Montessori, I wanted to have that conversation about the cultures, but I also going back to making sure we're doing those skills, making sure those skills about students understanding why we even have a summer solstice. And so I made sure I like a globe or a ball to represent the earth, a flashlight to represent the sun, question cards, which I added, and then books about the summer solstice. And while I was going through, I said, oh, wait, these are great vocabulary words to study with the students. And so again, with the vocabulary words, all I did, because the children that I was working with, I have some 3-year-olds, but they're really more so the 7 to 9 age. I wrote down the words so they could see the words. I said them out loud. We talked about the definitions of them. So we just spent time talking about these words, asking questions. Have you ever heard these words before? Have you seen them? Where have you heard Northern Hemisphere from? And so then that became a conversation. And it also made me, as a teacher, aware of how my students are getting information. I had some kids who love going to the science museum. So they actually told me about what is the summer solstice? Why does it happen? Because we went to this museum. I had some students who've never heard of the word solstice before. And so I was like, it was just great to know as a teacher by having these dialogues. I'm like, okay, I'm knowing who's in the room, what are the students bringing? And I had some students who could tell me different books that they read based on that, because we do have some readers in our group, and we have some students who are still learning how to read. So it was just a great introductory conversation. The showing of students of like why the solstice happened why we're talking about the earth turning around the sun. Like these are all like mini lessons within a bigger lesson. And so that's again tying back to like what are the skills students are learning. That was exciting. Like just doing the introduction and the presentation, that was super exciting for the kids. Because again, you will have some kids who know it. And I did. I had some kids that were like, well, I know this, and I know this. And I was like, you know what? That's amazing. Can you be the sun? Can you be stationary and be the sun for me? So at the beginning, I'm holding on material. And as I'm hearing students share what they know, I'm like, great, you could be my sun. Great, you can be the earth. Can you hold this for me? And I just started placing students where they need to be. Because sometimes those eager students, I got a lot to share, can sometimes pull out the wonder for students who are still trying to figure out what you're even talking about, or they're just curious. So you want to make sure you keep a flow in your presentation that the students who are eager and excited can be your hands and focus on being your hands, and the students who really want that wonder because they don't know, to not have that wonder kind of dissipated because we have an eager student who can't wait to share all their knowledge. And so with the introduction and the presentation, I moved slow on this. So we talked about it. The students were actually so excited about it. I actually was like, all right, we're gonna leave this here. I didn't layer. And as you start exploring with these lessons and you'll see how your students react, you're able to say like, I could put it all in the pot, or you might pull out. The reason why I slowed down, because I also want to make sure we took time on how different cultures celebrate the solstice and what does it mean to be grateful. Like all of these are deeper conversations. So I wanted to make sure that I said I was going to do this 2-part. So the following day, when we came back, I said, oh, you remember the presentation we did about why we had the summer solstice? And quickly did a run through. Let students share what they remember, what we did. And I said, okay, so now we're going to talk about how different cultures celebrate the solstice. And so then I asked, does anybody celebrate the solstice here? And so some students got to share that. And then I was like, all right, so let's talk about how other people celebrate. And so this was a time where we are getting that scientific concept, but then we're also adding the culture where students can see that other cultures around the world celebrate the solstice a little differently. And we also was able to tie to gratitude, because gratitude at our school is paramount to our work, especially being a nature-based program, talking about Earth. It's like we can't exist without being grateful. So I was also able to make sure I'm tying what we do at Gather as part of the work. And so I'm just moving a little bit slower here so you can see. And so then this is where the question cards came in. Like for the first question, what foods might be feasted on to celebrate the sun's bounty? So we talked about like, what does bounty mean? Then we talked about what plants need sun. And then we talked about what foods. And so it was, again, you're taking something that seems maybe so surface level, but you're allowing the children to make those cultural, deeper, personal connections. Then we asked what dances or music might honor the sun on solstice. And so some of these, sometimes children said, I don't know. There's sometimes I was like, oh, I need to look more into this, because I try my hardest not to, because even though I prepared the lesson, there's like, I could pull the answer out pretty fast, but I was like, I don't know, let's look that up. Let's think about that. What does that mean? And so we were able to slow down and have these conversations, because I will say when it comes to doing those cultural exploration, it is deeper than doing surface level of like, oh, this is what food this culture eats. This is the clothing that they wear. Because when we just stay there, it's almost like a checklist, right? We're like, all right, we hit these points about this culture, and then we move to the next one. When you are thinking about like, how can this information rest in the body, rest on the body, it is about doing slower work. So when you are doing your lesson plans, or when you're thinking about how can I create lessons that center equity, how can I create lessons for the global majority, it's not about cramming how many lessons I can cram in a week, right? It's really like, you know what, let's just start with one. Let me just create one and see where it goes. Do we finish it in just a session? Does it take 2 days? Did I like keeping it out for a week and having students keep circling back? Like, play with it. It doesn't have to be a one size fit all. And so I just encourage you to just like really have fun and play with these ideas, not seeing yourself as I need to say all the names correctly. I need to know all the information. I need to make sure I do 3 of these a week, or I need to make sure I do it every day. Start with one and see how it feels. Because I promise you, you're going to find by the end of the first one, you're going to be like, oh, wait, we actually could go deeper here. Or there's a book that I saw on Instagram or when I was scrolling that will be great for this. Let me order it from my library. Let me check it out. Or let me just get it off of Amazon. And you're going to find yourself really finding the joy and excitement in the work. And then the last one, what are you grateful for that the sun energy provides? So even, again, catching that back to science, like what does the sun do? What is the sun energy? And having those conversations and having children really think about what are they grateful for? And so when I say it was such a deep and circular conversation, it helped the children see that, oh, it is a scientific like phenomenon what happens, but there are also all these other elements beyond just the science part. Okay, I will pause here to see if there's any questions before I stop the screen share. But this lesson is also in your Google folder. That is yours to have. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. So we are going to talk about documentation. It's really important to document the process, especially for those who are in a nature-based setting or who are engaged in progressive education styles. Because when we think about how do we bring community in, how do we bring families in, documentation is a key part, because some folks and a lot of our parents, even me before I got into progressive education, really didn't understand. So what are you doing all day? So what is my child doing outside? How is learning happening in this environment when it's not your standard children sitting in desks or children sitting in circle for a large amount of time? So documentation helps orientate families to what you're doing the work, but also if you think about grants or doing fundraising letters, thinking about how can we bring resources or making community partnerships, documentation also can help with that, of letting people know what you do. All right, we can go to the next slide. So again, visibility of learning. This helps bring more people to the table. It also shows respect for children's ideas. So documentation shows children as well as parents that children's thoughts, perspective, processes, and ideas are seen as valuable, because children see you taking the photo, writing down what they're saying. These are all validating for the child to know that their thoughts and ideas have value outside of themselves. And it's a beautiful reflective practice. So as you build your program, or if you stay within the work, you're able to come back to see the strength as well as the growth areas within your program. And that's why it's so important to document, document, document. Go to the next slide. Okay, so there's many different ways to document, right? observe, record, interpret children's learning, development. So you can do anecdotal notes or records. And so those are just brief, objective descriptions about incidents, behaviors, include date, time, context. So for example, May 3rd, 10:15 a.m., Sarah spent 20 minutes reading. She stayed with one book, engaged with the pictures and text. So I would do some records keeping like this if I had some lessons out. Again, I'm using a little bit of a Montessori perspective, but let's say you wasn't in a Montessori classroom. You want to see how students are engaging with the work. You gave a lesson and they're doing follow-up work. I would just have a seat or stand somewhere and just pick maybe one student, two students, or a group of students who are working on one particular work and just make these objective descriptions. That shows you as an educator, are they enjoying it? Are they picking up what you're teaching? Are they staying not long enough in something? So you're able to get that kind of feedback. Work samples, children drawings, writings, photography, photographs of their projects. So you could actually collect the physical samples of work if you have a way to store it, or you could take photos of the 3D project or much larger works. Date each sample, provide context if necessary, and you can create portfolios for the students. Progressive education is really big on collecting work samples, building portfolios. It's such a beautiful practice. It does take time, but it's a beautiful practice to do portfolio work with children. So at the end of the year, you can actually see the range of growth, what they became interested in, the level of work that they have done. We go to the next slide. Observation notes. So these are detailed records of children interaction, choices, work patterns. Again, these observation notes are great for you in preparation for parent-teacher conference. Again, for you, if you are noticing different things in students where you're like, I'm curious to learn more about that. Let me observe. Observing brings out can answer most of your questions that you have about your teaching, about your students, if you take the time to observe. It's easier to observe if you have a co-teacher or someone who is able to facilitate or be able to engage with your children. If it's just you and you don't have that partner, that's an active conversation to have with your class about, all right, today's the day that Miss Ashley or Ashley is going to observe. Remember, during observation, that's not the time to tell me about what you did last night. That's not the time to have conversations with Ashley. My focus is observing you do the work. So I am going to sit here and observe and take my notes, and I will let you know when I am done observing. So you could either wear like a name tag or something to show you observing. It can be a card that you put on a desk or a tree stump if you have an outdoor classroom that it shows that you're observing, and when you're done, you put it away. You can find ways, nonverbal cues, to let your students know that you're observing. But observation helps answer so many of the questions we have as educators in the classroom. And then you have photographic and video documentation. This one varies. You can have a camera or tablet dedicated for that. For smaller programs like myself, I just use my iPhone. I let children know I'm documenting with my phone. And then when I'm no longer documenting, I put the phone away. So when the children see the phone come out, they know Miss Ashley is taking photos of our work. She's taking photos or videos of us engaged in the work. And then I put it away. Yeah, you go to the next slide. I think I had a double, I must have had it twice. Sorry about that. And then lastly, learning stories. And so this is great if you have a co-teacher or a parent volunteer, about having students come and tell a story about significant learning to happen. Or if something's a child drew a picture and was like, I want to tell a story about this picture, especially if your child is pre-writing age. Now, if your child is of writing age, if you teach students who are learning how to write or are writing, they can write their own learning stories. You do not have to dictate that. But for those pre-writers, this is such a beautiful practice. Again, it takes time, but it really shows that the child's thoughts and ideas are valuable. And it really opens your eyes to get to know who the child is in front of you. And let me see. And you can also, so that's one way. Another way, you could also include your professional interpretation. I always do that to the side, to be honest, when it comes to learning stories. So how I do it, I focus this on the child's words, child's ideas. I send it a child perspective. And then I have something running on the side that's not attached to the work. I usually use, what do you call it? A paper clip. And attach my notes so I can have another interpretation. I keep those things for children just in case our children decide to go to other schools or they want to apply to a program and they need, sometimes schools need portfolio work or they need follow-up work. There's just different things your children might need in your program. So I always like to have something for every child. And so with everything, right? It's like documentation is wonderful. I could talk about it actually in its own separate entirety because it's such a important part of the work, but you have to add it into your schedule. If it's not added, it is very hard to do it consistently. So creating a systematic approach to document daily, weekly, monthly routines, like finding something that you want to work on. And it could like be led up to doing it daily. If you are not into a documentation practice yet, so you know what, I want to just do it once a week on Thursdays. I want to do it every third Friday. Like find a system that you can routinely do it. Use a variety of documentation methods to capture different aspects of learning. For me, videos and photos are my go-to. I have to work on the writing part, the sitting down and observing and taking notes. So that is a growth area for me every single year because I have my go-tos and then the other parts I have to make sure I say, all right, today's an observation day. Doesn't matter if I feel behind on the lessons, today is an observation day and I need to sit and take these notes and see my students, not as actually multitasking, giving lessons, redirecting, listening, but as an observer. Next, organize documentation in accessible formats, depending, it can be portfolios, it could be digital. The following slides, I have some great digital platforms for you to explore, different prices that you can use to store your documentation. And lastly, schedule regular times for reviewing and reflecting on documentation. It is so easy, and I am uber guilty of it, of doing the work and not looking back at it at all till it's time for a parent-teacher conference or something shockingly happens in the classroom where I'm like, oh, well, let me go see what I've been writing about this student. It's so important to have scheduled regular times where you are looking at the photos, the videos, the notes, because it also will help with that creation when it comes to lesson planning to really see where your children are at and create things based on the child. And just a little asterisk, if you have programming where your students are constantly changing, this is more so, I will actually do observations to see how the children are engaged in what you are creating and what the presentations are like. Because then that could give you that feedback you need to say like, oh, maybe I need to add a little bit more of this. Like you'll be able to tweak it based on the engagement of the children, especially since your children rotate so frequently. All right, we can go next slide. Okay, so these are the digital platforms. I'll hit each one, but there is you might have already have seen it in your Google folder, but I have it hyperlinked. And you can click on it and look at the pros of each one, the cons also of each one. If you have a budget for a digital platform, or if you want to try something else yourself, like I know a lot of folks use just Google Drive and kind of build out their own. I heard about Seesaw. The people I've asked said it was really great because the students can document their own work. And so if you have older learners who you think are ready, because they are capable, they are capable of taking their own photos, things like that. If you want to explore, Seesaw is a great option. Kaimbu, great for early childhood education, documentation, assessment, parent communication, and they have the photos and video capture. For Story Park, that's the one I am looking into because I really like the narrative style documentation, and it has the collaboration with the teachers and families was a highlight for me. So I am looking into Story Park for our program to think about how we can do documentation where parents can see, and that narrative style is really great, especially for the early childhood. You could do next slide. Learning Genie is more so if Learning Genie is great if you are not part of progressive education. If you have more of a standardized or traditional style program, Learning Genie is great because it gives you the observation, assessment, daily reports that can fit a lot of the things that more or licensed programming needs. Learning Genie is a great way to keep that documentation orderly. And Educa is great for individual child portfolio. So if you are trying to have something a little bit more orderly and don't want too much paper, this is a great option for you. And again, the planning and assessment tools are great, but I don't need those kinds of tools. So it's really helpful to look through the different platforms and kind of zero in on exactly what you need so you could get the price point that you need. Because again, none of these are, I'm positive, I don't think any of them are taking up more than $25 to $45 a month. But that adds up. If you're running a program, everything adds up over time. So you want to make sure you find a consistent rhythm for your documentation, but you also find a platform that kind of hits exactly what you need. Okay, next slide. And here are, I'm like looking at the time. And here is our time to review. And so this resources to diversify your teaching practice is within the Google folder that was shared. If you need me to share the folder again, please let me know in the chat. And this is a time to just like click through everything, look at it, take notes, tap things, say, like, I'm coming back to here. Because this is a 3-hour workshop. And again, Deja and I really was intentional about using this time where you can walk away with strong takeaways. We didn't want to take up so much of the space where you were like, this is all great. And now I have to figure out how to look through all these resources and see what works for me. We're thinking about how can we use the time constructively so you can take this time to look through and see what works. And it's okay if none of these work for you. You're like, none of these are a great fit. That's okay too. But just take the time to see if anything fits or not. If you have any questions, you can let me know. If you need the file reshared or any other questions. If not, Deja, do you think is 20 minutes enough? Because I know you have your last portion. I want to be mindful.
Yeah. I'm not going to be long either for this last portion. It's been a long session. We're finally at the home stretch. And so I just want to make sure that um we're not taking up like so much time.
Yeah.
And so I guess we'll move on to the last part. Okay, so the last part is around assessments and implementing assessment data. And so aside from being an early childhood educator, I'm also a researcher and I do research with children. And so sometimes like assessments, whether you're doing a pre-assessment or a post-assessment, it really allows you to get a temperature check on who you're working with, prior knowledge, thoughts, feelings, and experiences. And these are different points of data that you can actually use to shape your program, and implement to make sure that these voices and opinions and views are included. And so pre-assessments. Pre-assessments, they're evaluations that are given before instruction or before the start of a program because it helps us tap into children's prior knowledge. So what do they already know? How do they feel? What are their thoughts? Do they have any concerns going into this new program or this new lesson? What are some skills they have? What are their interests? And what are some things they're going to need? And so these pre-assessments, they really help us refocus and reshift the narrative and the curriculum way before instruction even happens because we've already gotten a really good chunk of data in the beginning. And so like I said, it provides us with a baseline understanding of what children already know, and what they're interested in learning. And so this way it helps us cater, more of our lessons and our curriculum to them. And so if you are someone who uses lessons like Tinkergarten or maybe even things that you find on like Teachers Pay Teachers, they're often very generalized lesson plans. And sometimes, and I don't know if anyone else identifies with this, but sometimes I often have to go in and tweak those to make them a little bit more relevant to my program and a little bit more culturally relevant to the work that we're doing. And so sometimes the lesson plan and the curriculum, it can be a great starting point. It can be a great foundation. But then there are also times where we have to do a little bit of tweaking. And so that pre-assessment, it really helps you see like where tweaking needs to happen, based off what children know and what they need to know. And so when you're doing post assessments, these are the assessments that happen after the instruction or after the program is complete to help us track how children progress throughout the program. And so then we can look at that pre-assessment and look at that post-assessment and see what changed. Did children's understanding grow? Did their feelings or thoughts change? Or, were they satisfied? And so there are a lot of different post-assessments that we can give. And so we're just going to talk about a few, because the pre-assessment, it helps us create a really robust curriculum, and then the post-assessment helps us improve that curriculum and those experiences. And so in the link that we dropped for the folder, there's actually a booklet in there that was actually created by the NAAEE and the Natural Start Alliance, plus other entities, and these are different tools for assessments. And I just want to talk about a few of those and why implementing effective assessments are important. Like I said, when we're thinking about equity work, we don't want to go in with assumptions, and we want to make sure that we are checking our own bias. And so I know sometimes like just even taking race or ethnicity or culture aside, as adults, sometimes we tend to walk into a space knowing or believing that we know what children need, because we're the adult and this is what they need to know, versus asking them and co-creating lessons with them. And so the effective assessments, they help us really see, like, as educators, where we need to grow and maybe where we need to expand our own level of understanding on children's capabilities and their thought process. And so I think effective assessments, it always starts with a very general question of who, what, when, why, and how. And so the data that we get from this, it helps us continuously improve our programs. And so when we think about what type of assessments are right for me, there are a lot of different age appropriate assessments that we can tap into. I just want to go over a few and not keep you all too long. And so in your booklet that you'll have if you downloaded the link for the Google folder, there are different ways that you can engage with children in all different age capacities. And so you're looking at children who are early childhood, we tend to do a lot more observation with those types of children. We also tend to do interviews and even like art-based assessments with them. And then when children get a little bit older, that children to young adolescents, so 6 to 13, you might see a lot more surveys, yes and no surveys, journals, the same with adolescents. And so when we're thinking about what are some tools that are right for me, we also have to think about the age appropriateness of them, and how understandable these assessments are going to be for certain age groups. And so if I'm working with 2.5 to 6 years old, I might not want to give them a survey with just all written words, right? Because I don't want to assume that all children are at a reading level where they're going to understand what everything on this assessment says. And so I might want to do more picture based, so like smiley face, frowny face, and ask them questions about how they feel about something and have them color in the smiley face or the frowny face. Or I might ask them to draw a picture about their feelings and give them crayons, marker, and paper. Or I might interview them, just have a conversation, collect some narratives. And so this is like a little bit of a map that really helps point you in a direction of what types of assessments you want to use. Also thinking about the level of intensity. And so if you are evaluating just like a 1-day field trip or like a really short workshop, you might want to go with a survey or an assessment that is very low impact. And so just like a feedback. But if you are trying to collect data for over an extended period of time, then you might want to have a more high intensity form of assessment. And so, there's like different scales that you can use. And so we're going to look at a few of them. And so the first tool is the connectedness to nature scale. This is a survey that can be given as both a pre or post assessment. It can also be given throughout, like if you're doing a specific program and you want to track how children's feelings and attitudes change over time, you might give it as a pre-assessment. You might give it as like a mid-evaluation as well as like a post-assessment. And so what this does is it measures individuals' sense of belonging, their kinship, and their connectedness to their community and to nature. And so they'll ask questions like, I often feel a connection to nature. Do they strongly agree or strongly disagree? And so this version might be more suitable for children who are maybe like 9 and up because of the words and the numbers. However, this can easily be adapted for younger children. And so, like I said, you might want to change out the numbers for like facial expressions. So you might have a picture of a kid with a smiley face or a neutral face with no expression or like a sad face or maybe like an angry face to show whether they strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree, or strongly agree. And so this scale, it also predicts whether or not a person is likely to engage in behaviors that support nature. And so when we're talking about raising stewardship practices in children, this is a great scale to use because it shows not only how they feel about nature, like internally, but also just like how they behave in nature and what they feel their responsibility is. And then we have interpretations of drawings, which is another form of data. And this is suitable for all children, whether they're early childhood or adolescents, because who doesn't like to draw? And so this is a great way to analyze children's and how they understand or how they view something. And so I did a research study that used interpretation of drawings where I asked children to draw a picture of nature. I didn't specify where the nature was happening, what it was about. I just said draw a picture of nature. And so I got so many different drawings from children that show either them on a camping trip with a family member, hiking trails, garden, parks, playgrounds. And, these are an opportunity for you to say, I noticed you drew a picture of this. Tell me about your picture. And so not only are you interpreting children's drawings, but the interpretations are coming from them. And you are looking at their picture, you're listening to the narratives that they're giving you, and it really helps you understand like their interests. It helps you understand the prior knowledge that they already have. And it also might even be an opportunity for children to express the things that they want and that they need to see in nature. And so if you have children who aren't yet reading, this is a great tool for them. So the second tool is a little bit more robust. It is called the Children's Environmental Perception Scale. And this is designed to measure younger children's perceptions of nature, right? And so you're not only just thinking about what their interests are, but you're also thinking about their attitudes and their concerns towards environmental issues. And so thinking about back what Ashley was saying is that we don't want to saturate children with the problems so early on, especially under the age of 6. But this is also a way to understand children's attitudes towards environmental issues. And so this one incorporates words and pictures. So like thumbs up, thumbs down. And so one question is, people need plants to live. Do you strongly disagree with that? Disagree? Are you not sure? Agree or strongly agree? There's another one. It makes me sad to see homes built where plants and animals used to be. I would help to clean up green areas in my neighborhood. And so this is a scale that is often used because of its validity. It has been shown to be appropriate for all experiences when we're talking about inclusion. And so the scale has been tested on, children who are African American, Hispanic, and non-Hispanic white children to ensure that it measures a wide variety of potential perceptions of nature, even amongst diverse audiences. And so, very quick, that was that section. And so, if you all have a copy of the scale, and so of the brochure, and so if you all want to take some time to look through it, and you might have some questions about different scales, maybe you have questions about assessments that you have used or that you're thinking about using. Yeah, so it's a great time for questions.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mhm.
So, could I use some of these, like the interpretation of drawings or the last tool you shared? Could I use that as a way to like kick off a lesson or almost like a temperature check?
Yeah, so the interpretation of drawing, I actually used it as a pre assessment. So it was a way for me to gauge children's understandings of nature before we even went into the lesson. It also helped me generate interview questions. And so it actually led to more conversations with them about their drawings. And so it wasn't like they just did a drawing and that was it. And so I would just tell me about your drawing. And the more they talked, the more questions I had, the more I learned about them and what they knew already and what they wanted to know, what they wanted to see. Um, the perception scale can also be used in a for pre or post or even like a mid evaluation. There was a study done at the Schlitz Audubon Nature Center. I believe that's in Milwaukee. I can't 100% remember the state that it's in, but they did a salamander project for a year where this is 100% outdoor nature center, and there was a pond. They realized that a lot of the salamanders were having a hard time migrating like from one side of the pond to the other side without getting stuck and drowning. And so the children did a project where They would track the salamanders. They figured out how they needed to rebuild that section. And they also did a perception scale with the children to show that before the study, the kids didn't really pay attention to the salamander. Like it was just a part of the nature center. It was just a pond. They didn't even know that the salamanders were there. But as they went through the project, they were interviewed and they were given like the evaluation, and it showed that over time children started to take on a real sense of responsibility to make sure that nothing was happening to the salamanders. And so they actually built empathy towards them. They also felt a sense of responsibility, and they wanted to check on them. They wanted to check on the space to make sure that it wasn't eroded. And so this is something that you can use as a pre-survey. It's also something that you can use as a post survey to just see how to do like a comparison on what's changed over time and what are the factors that have caused this shift. Are there any more questions? And so I'll also add that during my time as a food corps service member, we used surveys a lot because we were working with children in the nutrition and environmental education space, and we were working in a area of the community that's considered a food apartheid. And so understanding that, you know, there's a grocery store, but it's in the central part of the city. And in order to get there, if you're living in the South or like the North Ward, you either need a car or you have to have access to frequent bus transportation or maybe like Uber or something like that to get to the grocery store. And so we did a survey with these children before we started our garden program with them. And it was a survey of some of 20 most common fruits and vegetables that children would typically eat or that people eat in general. And we asked the children to rate these fruits and vegetables on a scale of I like it, I tried it, I didn't like it, I've never tried it before, I want to try it, because it helped us see, okay, so here's what children are eating. Here's the nutrition and the produce that they do have access to that they are able to eat. And if they tried it and they didn't like it, then that gave us a data point. Maybe we should try it a different way. And so throughout the year, we were able to look at those surveys and we were able to do food demonstrations. We were able to do lessons with the children around a lot of the foods that they said they weren't experiencing. And then for the ones who said they didn't like it, we were trying it a different way. And so at the end of the program, we gave them the same survey again and to see if their answers were going to change, and how they felt about, their experience in the program. And so this helps you like build your program. It helps you cater like to the needs of each individual child. And it makes equity a possibility because you're not walking in with your own views of how things should be. You're actually considering this space as like a co-learning space for not only yourself but also the children and what they want and what they want to see, versus going in and doing a whole lesson and it didn't reach a single person because they were not interested in like what you were talking about. And so that's how surveys could really help. So a question I got from Dawn is, have you sent home surveys for families to fill out? And if so, yes. So I have sent out surveys home for parents. Um, one survey that we sent was around risk play and parents' perceptions of that. And this was at the beginning of the school year when we were like finalizing enrollment, and we sent it home, and it was just a survey of questions that helped us see what parents' ideas was on what their child was going to be doing in the program. And so there was questions of how often does your child play outside in your neighborhood? If not, why not? And then also ask questions about like first aid. And so, if children get hurt, scrapes, or cut, like what would you do in that situation? Because, it just allowed us to prepare just in case like that did happen. We know how parents would react. Or we've also sent home surveys about like the food menu, just lunch menu, to get parent feedback. We've sent home surveys just around like, something similar with like the food. What foods are you experiencing in your neighborhood? And so I think surveys are a really great way to like get people's opinions on things. And even if it's not like a paper survey, I love SurveyMonkey. It's free, I think up to like the first 10 questions, and you could just email the link to families and have them answer the survey question. It collects the data for you. It analyzes it for you in either a circle graph, or you can do bar graphs to let you see like comparison of people answers. And so I love SurveyMonkey. I also love Google Forms because, Google Forms is also easy to analyze. And yeah, so I would say that, just getting feedback often for your programs is important, and assessments is the great way to do that. But also just understanding like the children that you're working with. Assessments is a great way to even understand who they are and what they're interested in and what they want to do and what they know how to do. There was a child that I interviewed who loved climbing trees. I cannot remember the last time I climbed a tree and did not hurt myself in the process. But this child, he loved climbing trees, and he made sure that he wanted to teach his classmates how to properly climb a tree. And so when we were outside at Branch Brook Park during our outdoors nature academy, it was an opportunity for him to lead the children on how to climb a tree. Like he wanted to show how you use your hands and your feet at the same time, where you should place your hands and feet, where you shouldn't. You always want to find a groove, you always want to find a branch. And so it's something so simple, but he was able to take ownership of that experience because he loved talking about climbing trees and why you should do it. And his mother later sent me a video of him in the backyard trying to teach his little sister how to climb a tree. And so this is clearly something that he was an expert in. And so, it's a great opportunity to let children shine in the things that they know they're strong in. So we have about a few more minutes. So are there any questions or comments just for the overall presentation? It can be irrelevant to any part that we've gone over. Yeah, so Diane said it will be interesting to compare parent versus student responses to the Connectedness to Nature survey. That's actually pretty interesting. And one of the things that I've found that came up is that when children have an adult in their life who is very connected to nature, it really results in how connected they're going to be. And so like in one of my studies, I wanted to learn about how Black children in like an urban city like Newark are experiencing nature. And many of them said that they experience nature with like a mom, their aunt, cousins, friends, and things of that nature. And so I find that sometimes when children have like a trusted adult, it doesn't have to be a parent, it can just be a teacher or just someone who's a role model in their life that is connected to nature. It really increases their chances of being connected to it. And so I think that is a really great use for the Connected to Nature survey to get a comparison on like how children and their caregivers either are similar or different. Okay, so no more questions. That is okay. Um, so before we go, we do want to make sure that everyone has access to that folder. The folder, it can be a working document where because everyone shared on it, you always have access to it. And so we could continue to drop resources that we come across. If you all have anything that you would like to add to it, that's something that can be possible. And if you are interested in connecting with me offline, here's the Honeypot Instagram. This is my email address. This is the school's website. And then also like, aside from working with Honeypot, I also do consulting and I also do research. And so if you're wanting to access some of those things, those curriculum that I create and things like that, there's personal website. I'll leave that up and then we'll move on to Ashley.
I just want to put a little note. Please check out her personal website because I was doing it yesterday. Did not know. Miss Deja Jones is so accomplished with writing books, but also just doing spiritual wellness with writings. Sound like she has a playlist where you could get immersed in the work. Like, please check out her website. You're gonna fall down the rabbit hole like I did for like an hour. I was like, I'm supposed to be preparing. But so talented and gifted.
Thank you.
And if you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Afrocentric.Montessori. And so that's where you'll find me talking a lot about Montessori as well as Black culture and Black identity within Montessori. And if you would like to know more about the nature-based side of my work, you can follow at gather.school, where my co-founder Shelby Stone-Still and I have our page where you see what we do with our children at our school. I could be reached at afrocentricmontessori@gmail.com as well as gatherschool@gmail.com. And I have my website linked at afrocentricmontessori.com. And I also have a private Mighty Networks community where you can find culturally based lesson plans, because I found it was very hard to find it. So I just make something new every month with a calendar, as well as lesson plans that you can enjoy. I do consulting on that page too. So if you have any questions about how to do something in your classroom, you can ask in the community and I can do one-on-one with you, or I can share with you in a group. So the many ways you can find me and work with me.